Hello everybody and welcome to Storytime with Jev, basically. I know there are a few of you watching. I know not everybody shows up on the stream, but that's fine. If you haven't been here before, I read old-fashioned stories from books that are out of print, or they may be back in print, but they're gone beyond their original copyright. So they're public domain, essentially, old-fashioned stories for children, but we read them for adults as well. A lot of the old-fashioned stories aren't quite as child-friendly as modern ones are, so yeah, if you're an adult here listening, that's cool. And you also understand that the way we used to use language compared with how we use it now is a little bit different. So there will be, usually the word usage is a little bit odd, especially with an old one like George MacDonald's books. He was Scottish, he was writing in the 1870s, 1880s, I think, so that's a long time ago. We've changed the way we use English a lot. And also one of the other things he used to write was adult novels that were written in Scottish, 1880s, I think, so that's a long time ago. Kind of a dialect, so it had a lot of Scottish only words in it that were used, and if you've never heard any of those before, it was rather odd. But these ones aren't written that way, thankfully, but he still has this very old-fashioned English usage. So that's part of why they're a little bit quirky, a little bit different. This story, The Princess and Curdie, by George MacDonald, is a Victorian fantasy story. There are no fairies in it, but there are other fantasy elements in it, so that's why it's referred to as a Victorian fantasy. If you're here from other parts of the world, we are in New Zealand. It is 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Children are finishing school now or soon. If you're in another part of the world, it will be another time of day for you. I know that if Forres is here, he will be probably getting ready to go to bed now because he's been gaming for his evening, night time, whatever. I'm not quite sure what it is, but he often listens while he's going off to sleep, so that's lovely. Bedtime stories. I've also got another friend over in Canada who often listens when she's ready to doze off or just have some quiet, chill time, focusing on something outside of the world that we live in now. And that's how me reading stories started during COVID lockdown here in New Zealand last year, reading Millie Molly Mandy stories. For those of you who are unfamiliar with what we do, you can join our Discord server. The link is down below. If you're watching this on YouTube later on, there will be links over there as well to get to our Discord server. You can see illustrations from the books that we read. You can actually submit your own illustrations if you would like to. Get sketching while you're listening. It's a great way to actually think about a story that you're listening to, is to draw while you're listening. You don't have to just sit there doing nothing. Draw pictures, fiddle with your fidget toys, whatever. Some of us are ADHD and on the autistic spectrum, so therefore having something that we can do with our hands is a really good way to keep our brain engaged with what we're listening to. And there you go. The YouTube link is also down below. I'm going to start reading. We are partway through The Princess and Curdie by George MacDonald, and this is chapter 10, and it's called The Heath. So here we go. Chapter 10, The Heath. He had to go to the bottom of the hill to get into a country he could cross. And this is chapter 10. For the mountains to the north were full of precipices, and it would have been losing time to go that way. Not until he had reached the king's house was it any use to turn northwards. Many a look did he raise as he passed it, to the dove tower, and as long as it was in sight, but he saw nothing of the Lady of the Pigeons. There you go, that's some of the odd phrasing that we get. Anyway, we'll carry on. On and on he fared, and came in a few hours to a country where there were no mountains more, only hills with great stretches of desolate heath. Now, this is Curdie, who's a young miner, a young man who used to work in the mines, and the mines that he worked in are up the side of a mountain, and he's lived all his life on the mountain. So he's probably probably going to start encountering new places that people live that he's never been to anywhere like before. Here and there was a village, but that brought him little pleasure, for the people were rougher and worse mannered than those in the mountains, and as he passed through, the children came behind and mocked him. He's wearing his work clothes because he was told to go as he was. "There's a monkey running away from the mines," they cried. Sometimes their parents came out and encouraged them. "He don't want to find gold for the king any longer, the lazy bones," they would say. "He'll be well taxed down here, though, and he won't like that either." But it was little to Curdie that men who did not know what he was about should not approve of his proceedings. He gave them a merry answer now and then, and held diligently on his way. When they got so rude as to nearly make him angry, he would treat them as he used to treat the goblins, and sing his own songs to keep out their foolish noises. Once a child fell as he turned to run away after throwing a stone at him. The child fell after he ran away from throwing a stone at Curdie. He picked him up, Curdie picked him up, kissed him better, and carried him to his mother. The mother had run out in terror when she saw the strange miner about, as she thought to take vengeance on her boy. When he put him in her arms, she blessed him, and Curdie went on his way rejoicing. So, ignorance everywhere. Oh, and Curdie's not only wearing his work clothes, he's carrying his work pickaxe. So that might be part of why they think he's a miner and that he's a rough person. And so the day went on, and the evening came, and in the middle of a great desolate heath, he began to feel tired, and sat down under an ancient hawthorn, through which every now and then a lone wind that seemed to come from nowhere and go nowhere, no whither, sighed and hissed. It was very old and distorted. There was not another tree for miles all around. It seemed to have lived so long, and to have been so torn and tossed by the tempests of the moor, that it had at last gathered a wind of its own, which got up now and then, tumbled itself about, and lay down again. Curdie had been so eager to get on that he had eaten nothing since his breakfast. Hi, Forres, it's really great having you here. Thank you for saying hi. Curdie had been so eager to get on that he had eaten nothing since his breakfast, but he had had plenty of water, for many little streams had crossed his path. He now opened the wallet his mother had given him, and began to eat his supper. The sun was setting, a few flat clouds had gathered about the west, but there was not a single cloud anywhere else to be seen. Obviously, wallet in their world doesn't mean what it does to us. Wallet for us is something that you put your money and your credit cards in. The wallet in those days was a leather satchel, a leather bag that you carried for your essentials. Not as big as a suitcase, smaller than a briefcase, probably a little bit like a shoulder bag, a small shoulder bag, like a messenger bag maybe even. That sort of thing. So that's what his food was in. He was taking it with him. He was carrying everything he needed. A few clouds had gathered about the west, but there was not a single cloud anywhere else to be seen. Now, Curdie did not know that this was a part of the country very hard to get through. Nobody lived there, though many had tried to build in it. Some died very soon. Some rushed out of it. Those who stayed longest went raving mad and died a terrible death. Such as walked straight on and would not spend a night there got through well and were nothing the worse. But those who slept even a single night in it were sure to meet with something they could never forget, and which often left a mark everybody could read. And that old hawthorn might have been enough for a warning. It looked so like a human being, dried up and distorted with age and suffering, with cares instead of loves, and things instead of thoughts. Both it and the heath around it, which stretched on all sides as far as he could see, were so withered that it was impossible to say whether they were alive or not. And while Curdie ate, there came a change. Clouds had gathered over his head and seemed drifting about in every direction, as if not shepherded by the slow, unwilling wind, but hunted in all directions by wolfish flaws across the plains of the sky. The sun was going down in a storm of lurid crimson, and out of the west came a wind that felt red and hot one moment, and cold and pale the next, and very strangely it sung in the dreary old hawthorn tree, and very cheerily it blew about Curdie, now making him creep close up to the tree for shelter from its shivery cold, now fan himself with his cap. It was so sultry and stifling. It seemed to come from the deathbed of the sun, dying in fever and ague. And as he gazed at the sun, now on the verge of the horizon, very large and very red and very dull, for though the clouds had broken away, a dusty fog was spreading all about him, Curdie saw something strange appear against him, moving about like a fly over his burning face. It looked as if it were coming out of his hot furnace heart. Curdie saw something strange appear against him, and was a living creature of some kind surely, but its shape was very uncertain, because the dazzle of the light all around it melted its outlines. It was growing larger. It must be approaching. It grew so rapidly that by the time the sun was half down, its head reached the top of his arch, and presently nothing but its legs were to be seen, crossing and recrossing the face of the vanishing disk. When the sun was down, he could see nothing more of it, but in a moment he heard its feet galloping over the dry, crackling heather, and seeming to come straight for him. He stood up, lifted his pickaxe, and threw the hammer end over his shoulder. He was going to have a fight for his life, and now it appeared again, and seeming to come straight vague, yet very awful, in the dim twilight the sun had left behind him. But just before it reached him, down from its four long legs it dropped, flat on the ground, and came crawling towards him, wagging a huge tail as it came. Just before it reached him, down from its and that's the end of that chapter. So what do you think it is? Oh goodness. Oh, and I forgot to tell you, we need to have drinks of water in our chapter breaks. And that's the end of that chapter. So I hope you've got yours ready, and I'm just going to top up my little water bottle from my bigger one. I forgot to tell you, we need to have to wave it around, and so I don't run out. So keep talking amongst yourselves. I hope you've got yours ready, and we'll get on with reading. Whoopsie, from my bigger one, I overfilled it. We need to have to wave it around, and it's dribbling down my leg, and so I don't run out. Cold. So keep talking amongst yourselves. You've got yours ready, and we'll get on the reading. Whoopsie. Thinking about what I was saying to you instead of what I was doing. Sorry. And it's cold. Yeah. It's winter time here in New Zealand, so the weather is a little bit cooler. Not quite as cold as it was the other day. Oh, that was cold. We had the fire going all day then. Today's been good. It's winter time. So I hope you've got your drink of water ready, and maybe even something to snack on as well while you're listening. Oh, that was cold. Oh, sorry, I've got an itchy nose. I haven't got a rash or anything like that. I just, every now and then my skin gets itchy, and so I have to give it a bit of a rub. Anyway, we'll carry on. The Princess and the Curdie by George MacDonald, chapter 11, called Lina. I haven't got a rash or anything like that. You could say it Lina, but I've always called it Lina. It was Lina. All at once Curdie recognised her, the frightful creature he had seen at the princess's. He dropped his pickaxe and held out his hand. She crept nearer and nearer, and laid her chin in his palm, and he patted her ugly head. Then she crept away behind the tree and lay down, panting hard. Curdie did not much like the idea of her being behind him. Horrible as she was to look at, she seemed to his mind more horrible when he was not looking at her. But he remembered the child's hand and never thought of driving her away. That's a reference to, in the previous day's readings, he had received a magical gift, effectively, where if he held the hand of a creature, he could tell what they were really like inside themselves, not what they looked like. So Lina, who looked like this rather hideous, strange, distorted creature, actually has the hand of a young child inside it, a soft, lovely hand, not threatening at all. And yet he's probably going to discover people who seem very nice and normal, who, when he holds their hand, they're going to have the hand of some hideous, dangerous creature or something else like that. I think, along the way. That's probably why he's got this gift. Anyway, so he remembered the child's hand and never thought of driving her away. Now and then he gave a glance behind him, and there she lay flat, with her eyes closed and her terrible teeth gleaming between her two huge forepaws. Her bottom jaw sticks out beyond her top jaw, and her teeth poke up to her eyes closed, and she's got this funny teeth poking out, a bit like a friend's got a dog that's got a face a little bit like that, but she's huge. Lina in the story is huge. After his supper and his long day's journey, it was no wonder Curdie should now be sleepy. Since the sunset, the air had been warm and pleasant. He lay down under the tree, closed his eyes, and thought to sleep. He found himself mistaken, however, but although he could not sleep, he was yet aware of resting delightfully. Presently he heard a sweet sound of singing somewhere, such as he had never heard before, singing as of curious birds far off, which drew nearer and nearer. At length he heard their wings, and opening his eyes, saw a number of very large birds, as it seemed, alighting around him, still singing. It was strange to hear song from the throats of such big birds, and still singing, with large and round, but not the less bird-like voices, they began to weave a strange dance about him, moving their wings in time with their legs, but the dance seemed somehow to be troubled and broken, and to return upon itself in an eddy in place of sweeping smoothly on. And he soon learned, in the low short growls behind him, the cause of the imperfection. They wanted to dance all round the tree, but Lina would not permit them to come to her side. Now Curdie liked the birds and did not altogether like Lina, but neither nor both together made a reason for driving away the princess's creature. Doubtless she had been a goblin's creature, but the last time he saw her was in the king's house and the dove tower and at the old princess's feet. So he left her to do as she would, and the dance of the birds continued, only a semicircle, troubled at the edges, and returning upon itself, but their song and their motions, nevertheless, and the waving of their wings, began at length to make him very sleepy. Only a semicircle. All the time he had kept doubting every now and then whether they could really be birds, and the sleepier he got, the more he imagined them something else, but he suspected no harm. Suddenly, just as he was sinking beneath the waves of slumber, he awoke in fierce pain. The birds were all upon him, all over him, and had begun to tear him with beaks and claws. He had but time, however, to feel that he could not move under their weight, when they set up a hideous screaming and scattered like a cloud. Lina was amongst them, snapping and striking with her paws, while her tail knocked them over and over, but they flew up, gathered, and descended on her in a swarm, perching upon every part of her body so that he could only see a huge misshapen mass, which seemed to go rolling away into the darkness. He got up and tried to follow, but could see nothing, and after wandering about hither and thither for some time, he found himself again beside the hawthorn. He feared greatly that the birds had been too much for Lina, and had torn her to pieces. In a little while, however, she came limping back, and lay down in her old place. Curdie also lay down, but from the pain of his wounds there was no sleep for him. When the light came, he found his clothes a good deal torn, and his skin as well, but gladly wondered why the wicked birds had not at once attacked his eyes. Then he turned, looking for Lina. She rose and crept to him, but she was in far worse plight than he, plucked and gashed and torn with the beaks and claws of the birds, especially about the bare part of her neck, so that she was pitiful to see, and those worst wounds she could not reach to lick. Poor Lina, said Curdie, you got all those helping me. She wagged her tail and made it clear she understood him. Then it flashed upon Curdie's mind that perhaps this this was the companion the princess had promised him. For the princess did so many things differently from what anybody looked for. Lina was no beauty, certainly, but already, the first night, she had saved his life. "Come along, Lina," he said. "We want water." She put her nose to the earth and after snuffing for a moment, darted off in a straight line. Curdie followed. The ground was so uneven that after losing sight of her many times, at last he seemed to have lost it altogether. In a few minutes, however, he came upon her waiting for him. Instantly she darted off again. After he had lost and found her again many times, he found her the last time lying beside a great stone. As soon as he came up, she began scratching at it with her paws. When he raised it an inch or two, she shoved in first her nose and then her teeth and lifted with all the might of her strong neck. When at last between them they got it up, there was a beautiful little well. He filled his cap with the clearest and sweetest water and drank. Then he gave to Lina, and she drank plentifully. Next he washed her wounds very carefully, and as he did so he noted how much the bareness of her neck added to the strange repulsiveness of her appearance. Then he bethought him of the goatskin wallet his mother had given him, and taking it from his shoulders, tried whether it would do to make a collar for the poor animal. He found there was just enough, and the hair so similar in colour to Lina's that no one else could suspect it of having grown somewhere else. Goatskin, with the fur still on it. He took his knife, ripped up the seams of the wallet, and began tying the skin to her neck. It was plain she understood perfectly what he wished, for she endeavoured to hold her neck conveniently, turning it this way and that while he contrived, with his rather scanty material, to make the collar fit. As his mother had taken care to provide him with needles and thread, he soon had a nice gorget. That's a piece of clothing that is just a collar that was worn in old days. And a nice gorget. I'll try to find it where I got to. He soon had a nice gorget ready for her. He laced it on with one of his bootlaces, which its strong hair covered. Poor Lina looked much better in it, nor could anyone have called it a piece of finery. If ever green eyes with a yellow light in them looked grateful, hers did. He's just covered one of her weak points. He's looking after her. As they had no longer any bag to carry them in, Curdie and Lina now ate what was left of the provisions. Then they set out again upon their journey. For 7 days it lasted. They met with various adventures, and in all of them Lina proved so helpful and so ready to risk her life for the sake of her companion that Curdie grew not merely very fond of, but very trustful of her. And her ugliness, which at first only moved his pity, now actually increased his affection for her. One day, looking at her stretched on the grass before him, he said, "Oh, Lina, if the princess would but burn you in her fire of roses." She looked up at him, gave a mournful whine like a dog, and laid her head on his feet. What or how much he could not tell, but clearly she had gathered something from his words. She looked up at him, gave a mournful whine like a dog. And that's the last page of that chapter, and I am going to try and reset my microphone so you don't get quite so much of an echo. Hi Lemon, good to have you here. So I've got Lemon here, I've got Flores here, both of you who seem to like listening to me reading towards the end of your day, and I'm just going to lose sound for a moment while I swap which microphone you hear me as being. Both of you who seem to like listening to... I'll keep muttering. Tell me when you can hear me again. And I think that should be working now. Is it? It's showing on my sound display that it's working. Yes, yay. Is it echoey now? There's a slight delay between me seeing myself on my broadcast kit and it showing up in the chat when you reply to me. Good, thank you, that's wonderful. So, chapter break, drink of water, here we go, and I'll try not to pour it all over myself this time. There. Am I going to have to reread the first 2 chapters, or are they okay? Yes, I've been really well. Hubby and I are going to be travelling down country to see Anita, Joel's sister, down in Wellington. And we are leaving tomorrow, so I may or may not actually be reading on Friday. I'm not too sure. It will depend on where we are, if I have any data signal, or if we're at a place where I can use Wi-Fi. I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to read. We will be away for just over a week, so most of the time when we're down there I shall have access to Wi-Fi, which will be great. I'll take my tablet with me so we can carry on reading. And we're going to go and see where she's living, and maybe meet up with some other people that we know down there as well. It should be great. You can drive it in a day, but we're going to split it and make it a 2-day trip, so we go and see a little bit more and don't get so tired by the time we get down there. And I'm really hoping that I can actually carry on with the rest of the story reading on my usual days that I read, so that would be really cool if we can. And if I get really stuck, I will do it using my phone, like I've done a couple of times before, apart from when I first started, which was all of the stories were done using my phone, and using mobile data, or if we're in a cafe or somewhere quiet that has Wi-Fi, but I don't have my computer, obviously. Actually, yeah, I'm going to be doing it on my... Oh, that's a good point. I might see if I can take my laptop with me and add in some of the images that I've got so that my overlays work, just because I like having them. And then when we're down there I can actually carry on reading and it'll look a lot more normal. I haven't read Little Women yet. That's a really good point. I will have a look at that one too. That's originally written by, I think she was a Canadian author. I'm not sure. She might be American, North American. She's North American anyway. Oh, that's great. I'm glad you're reading it, Lemon. That's really good. Reading it on your phone. That's great. Have you got it from the library, or have you been able to download it from somewhere like Project Gutenberg or archive.org or anywhere like that? I'm glad that you're really enjoying it. That's good. Assuming that you're enjoying it since you're reading it after having watched it. Anyway, so yeah, Gutenberg's good. And so write that down in the chat over on Discord to remind me. Yes, Louisa May Alcott. She's great. I've never actually read it. I've only watched a few different versions of it. So good on you for having read it before. You're doing better than I am. And also, if you've got any other stories from that sort of era that you're really interested in me reading, that would be really cool too. They don't have to be specifically children's books, but more younger focused rather than older adults focused, and definitely older style books. That's cool. I'm going to carry on reading The Princess and Curdie, and then we'll have another chat in the next chapter break. So The Princess and Curdie by George MacDonald, Chapter 12, and this is More Creatures. I'm getting more fluent on those Roman numerals, aren't I? See, look, the chapters have got Roman numerals, and they've also got nice little illustrations for the first initial on the chapter. More creatures. One day, from morning till night, they had been passing through a forest. As soon as the sun was down, Curdie began to be aware that there were more in it than themselves. First he saw only the swift rush of a figure across the trees at some distance. Then he saw another, and then another at shorter intervals. Then he saw others both further off and nearer. At last, missing Lina and looking about after her, he saw an appearance almost as marvellous as herself steal up to her and begin conversing with her after some beast fashion, which evidently she understood. Presently what seemed a quarrel arose between them, and stranger noises followed, mingled with growling. At length it came to a fight, which had not lasted long, however, before the creature of the wood threw itself upon its back and held up its paws to Lina. She instantly walked on, and the creature got up and followed her. They had not gone far before another strange animal appeared, approaching Lina, when precisely the same thing was repeated. the vanquished animal rising and following with the former. Again and yet again and again, a fresh animal came up, seemed to be reasonable and certainly was fought with, seemed to be reasoned and certainly was fought with and overcome by Lina, until at last, before they were out of the wood, she was followed by 49 of the most grotesquely ugly, the most extravagantly abnormal animals imagination can conceive. To describe them were a hopeless task. I knew a boy who used to make animals out of heather roots. Wherever he could find 4 legs, he was pretty sure to find a head and a tail. His beasts were a most comic menagerie, and right fruitful of laughter. But they were not so grotesque and extravagant as Lina and her followers. One of them, for instance, was like a boa constrictor walking on 4 little stumpy legs near its tail. About the same distance from its head were 2 little wings, with which it was forever fluttering as if trying to fly with them. Curdie thought it fancied it did fly with them, when it was merely plodding on busily with its 4 little stumps. How it managed to keep up he could not think, till once when he missed it from the group. The same moment he caught sight of something at a distance, plunging at an awful serpentine rate through the trees, and presently, from behind a huge ash, the same creature fell again into the group, quietly waddling along on its 4 stumps. Watching it after this, he saw that when it was not able to keep up any longer, and they had all got a little space ahead, it shot into the wood away from the root, and made a great round, serpenting along in huge billows of motion, devouring the ground, undulating awfully, galloping as if it were all legs together, and its 4 stumps nowhere. In this mad fashion it shot ahead, and a few minutes after toddled in again among the rest, walking peacefully and somewhat painfully on its few 4s. From the time it takes to describe one of them, it will be readily seen that it would hardly do to attempt a description of each of the 49. They were not a goodly company, but well worth contemplating nevertheless, and Curdie had been too long used to the goblins' creatures in the mines and on the mountain to feel the least uncomfortable at being followed by such a herd. On the contrary, the marvellous vagaries of shape they manifested amused him greatly and shortened the journey much. Before they were all gathered, however, it had got so dark that he could see some of them only a part of the time, and every now and then, as the company wandered on, he would be startled by some extraordinary limb or feature, undreamed of by him, before thrusting itself out of the darkness into the range of his his knowledge. "You ken what I'm talking about, Jimmy." Ken, no. Knowledge. Probably there was some of his old acquaintances among them, although such had been the conditions of semi-darkness, in which alone he had never seen any of them, that it was not likely he would be able to identify any of them. On they marched solemnly, almost in silence, for either with feet or voice the creatures seldom made any noise. By the time they reached the outside of the wood it was morning twilight. Into the open trooped the strange torrent of deformity, each one following Lina. Suddenly she stopped, turned towards them, and said something which they understood, although to Curdie's ear the sound she made seemed to have no articulation. Instantly they all turned and vanished in the forest, and Lina alone came trotting lithely and clumsily after her master. And that's the end of that chapter, and I'm going to see if I can find a way to show you what these things look like. I have some pictures from someone's illustrations of them, and I'm just going to see if I can do that since it's our chapter break. So you be busily drinking your water while I see if I can find a way to show you these pictures. They are really quite intriguing. And I'm really pleased that somebody has actually put the effort into trying to make illustrations of them. Here we go. Come on. Wakey. I'm just waiting for my Windows Explorer to show up and do its previews. I think it's thinking that it's very busy. That's why. come on. So how are you doing? Oh yes, I love illustrations too. I got all the other ones up for the other book. Did you see that? Both the illustrators that I had found pictures for. Yes, exactly. I love looking at book illustrations. And yes, if I haven't seen a movie but I've only read a book, I will often have... I'll often be I don't know about you, but I will often be disappointed when they finally make a movie or a TV series and I've got this picture in my head that's based off the illustrations in the book, but on top of that they have been extended because I've been reading the story and learning more about the characters in it. I'm just wondering why this is not showing me that illustration I just double clicked on. Come on, wake up. It's probably indexing the files. I've probably got too much stuff on my computer, you know, the usual. Anyway, we'll get there. We'll get there. Come on. Come on, nice little computer. Keep going. Keep going. I want you to see the pictures. I haven't yet tried to put them in there, but I will. Yes. The Harry Potter movies got some stuff right, but also a lot wrong. That's common. That's so common when you really know a story from a book, even if it's not an illustrated book, but there are descriptions written in there. You have the pictures you have in your mind are based on the descriptions that are written in the book, and sometimes it's quite disappointing when you then go to watch a movie and obviously the people that they've cast in the movie or TV series don't actually meet the pictures that are in your head. A prime example of that, and the author has apologised, was adult books. Jack Reacher stories written by Lee Childs. When they did the movie, they did 2 movies of it, and apparently it was because of the funding. Tom Cruise was cast as Jack Reacher. Now, the Jack Reacher books always describe Jack Reacher at the beginning of the story or near the beginning of the story, and he's big and he's solid and he fights. Oh, good. One of my pictures has actually turned up for me. Now I've just got to see if I can get it to look at you. No, not look at you. Get it so you can see it. I need to find my browser window, and then I need to go to my my overlays, that's it, and find the image overlay, the image in the overlay, and then I can put it up there where you can see the cover of the book at the moment. That's where I'm going to see if I can try and get the picture for you so you can see it. Anyway, so Tom Cruise is about my size, and he's not really solid. I mean, yeah, he builds muscle for a role, but he's not menacing. Physically, he's not menacing when you see him, and he doesn't have dirty blonde hair, and this is so much part of the character that's described and why the character works in the stories and the books that it doesn't translate when you watch the movies. If you saw the movies with Tom Cruise in them and didn't think of them as being a Jack Reacher story, just thought of it as an action story, they worked really well. But as a Jack Reacher story, they don't work, because the personality and the physicality of the actor does not translate well to the stories, and they're like the 33 books or something like that at least. Yeah, so anyway, you've come across union members who run parking lots for film sets, and they have stories. Oh yeah, I bet they do. I have heard that there are some stories about that particular actor. I'm not saying anymore. I'm just waiting for my... Oh no, now it's saying invalid authorization token. Leave. Okay. I'm going to keep reading and let that wake itself up. Oh, it's on that side of me. My browser is on that side of me, on the other monitor. And I will let that wake itself up. Probably. Yes. And then if I can, I will see if I can put a picture up there. If I can't get it to work while I'm reading today, I will go and put the illustrations over on our Discord server, okay? On our Discord server, which you will find a link for down below if you haven't already. Those of you who haven't been here before or haven't followed me before. And then you can go and look for the channel within our Discord server which has illustrations, and you'll see the illustrations from our other previous books too. Some of our previous books. That's a more recent thing. So that's loading. I'm going to carry on reading. Yeah, apple boxes. Yeah. He's nowhere near 6'4" or higher, which is Jack Reacher is meant to be. So, The Princess and Curdie by George MacDonald. Chapter 13, The Baker's Wife. They were now passing through a lovely country of hill and dale and rushing stream. The hills were abrupt, with broken chasms for watercourses, and deep little valleys full of trees. But now and then they came to a larger valley with a fine river, whose level banks and the adjacent meadows were dotted all over with red and white kine. Not sure what that is. Kine, K-I-N-E. If it was a different language, I would say it differently. While on the fields above, there sloped a little to the foot of the hills, anyone would think I'd never read before. I'll start that bit again. Whose level banks and the adjacent meadows were dotted all over with red and white kine, while on the fields above that sloped a little to the foot of the hills grew oats and barley and wheat, and on the sides of the hills themselves vines hung and chestnuts rose. Chestnuts are a type of tree, as well as the nut that grows on them. They came at last to a broad, beautiful river, up which they must go to arrive at the city of Gwyntystorm. 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 I think it's meant to sound like it comes from Welsh or something. The city of Gwyntystorm, where the king had his court. And as they went, the valley narrowed, and then the river, but still it was wide enough for large boats. After this, while the river kept its size and the banks narrowed until there was only room for a road between the river and the great cliffs that overhung it. After this, while the river kept its size, the banks narrowed until there was only room for a road between the river and the great cliffs that overhung it. At last river and road took a sudden turn, and lo, a great rock in the river, which dividing flowed around it, and on the top of the rock the city, with lofty walls and towers and battlements, and above the city the palace of the king, built like a strong castle. But the fortifications had long been neglected, for the whole country was now under one king, and all men said there was no more need for weapons or walls. No man pretended to love his neighbour, but everyone said he knew that peace and quiet behaviour was the best thing for himself, and that, he said, was quite as useful and a great deal more reasonable. The city was prosperous and rich, and if anybody was not comfortable, everybody else said he ought to be. Excuse me. In the next chapter break, I will have a go at those pictures, because the overlays come up properly now. When Curdie got up opposite the mighty rock, which sparkled all over with crystals, he found a narrow bridge defended by gates and portcullis and towers with loopholes. But the gates stood wide open, and were dropping from their great hinges. The portcullis was eaten away with rust, and clung to the grooves, evidently immovable, while the loopholed towers had neither floor nor roof, and their tops were fast filling up their interiors. So the towers, the roof of the tower and the floors in between are falling down inside the towers. So it's not very well defended at all. It's not defended, really. It's really old. Thank you for trying to look that up. It might be in a dictionary. Botanical dictionary? I don't know. Now I need to find myself. Got lost. I know I'm here, but whereabouts on the page? Their tops were fast filling up their interiors. Curdie thought it a pity, if only for their old story, that they should be thus neglected. Sometimes, yeah, I agree. Sometimes if you've got old buildings from previous generations, usually, if you've got old buildings from previous generations, but you don't have respect for the history that has been passed, you just take it for granted. You don't look after those old things, and you assume that it doesn't matter because everybody knows about the background. Unfortunately, the assumption we make means that those who come after us, our children, our children's children, and so on, have no idea what the relevance is. And so they don't necessarily look after it, protect it, or learn from their past, which is something we all need to do. Curdie thought it was a pity, if only for their old story, that they should be thus neglected, but everybody in the city regarded these signs of decay as the best proof of the prosperity of the place. Commerce and self-interest, they said, had got the better of violence, and the troubles of the past were whelmed in the riches that flowed in at their open gates. Indeed, there was one sect of philosophers in it which taught that it would be better to forget all the past history of the city, were it not that its former imperfections taught its present inhabitants how superior they and their times were, and enabled them to glory over their ancestors. Ooh, that's not a good move. There were even certain quacks in the city who advertised pills for enabling people to think well of themselves, and some few bought them. But most laughed and said with evident truth that they did not require them. Indeed, the general theme of discourse was that when they met was how much wiser they were than their fathers. Curdie crossed the river and began to ascend the winding road that led up to the city. They met a good many idlers, and all stared at them. It was no wonder they should stare. But there was an unfriendliness in their looks, which Curdie did not like. No one, however, offered them any molestation. Lina did not invite liberties. After a long ascent, they reached the principal gate of the city and entered. The street was very steep, ascending towards the palace, which rose in great strength above all the houses. Just as they entered, a baker whose shop was a few doors inside the gate came out in his white apron and ran to the shop of his friend the barber on the opposite side of the way. But as he ran, he stumbled and fell heavily. Curdie hastened to help him up, and found he had bruised his forehead badly. He swore grievously at the stone for tripping him up, declaring it was the third time he had fallen over it within the last month, and saying what was the king about that he allowed such stone to stick up for ever on the main street of his royal residence of Gwyntystorm. What was a king for if he would not take care of his people's heads? And he stroked his forehead tenderly. Was it your head or your feet that ought to bear the blame for your fall? Asked Curdie. Why, you booby of a miner, my feet, of course, answered the baker. Nay, then, said the Curdie, the king can't be to blame. Oh, I see, said the baker, you're laying a trap for me. Of course, if you come to that, it was my head that ought to have looked after my feet, but it is the king's part to look after us all and have his streets smooth. Well, I don't see, said Curdie, why the king should take care of the baker when the baker's head won't take care of the baker's feet. Who are you to make game of the king's baker? Cried the man in a rage, but instead of answering, Curdie went up to the bump on the street which had repeated itself on the baker's head, and turning the hammer end of his mattock, struck it such a blow that it flew wide in pieces. Blow after blow he struck until he had levelled it with the street. But out flew the barber upon him in a rage. What do you break my window for, you rascal, with your pickaxe? I am very sorry, said Curdie. It must have been a bit of stone that flew from my mattock. I couldn't help it, you know. Couldn't help it? A fine story. What do you go breaking the rock for, the very rock upon which the city stands? Look at your friend's forehead, said Curdie. See what a lump he has got on it with falling over that same stone. What's that to do with my window? Cried the barber. His forehead can mend itself, my poor window can't. But he's the king's baker, said Curdie, more and more surprised at the man's anger. What's that to me? This is a free city. Every man here takes care of himself, and the king takes care of us all. I'll have the price of my window out of you, or the exchequer shall pay for it. Something caught Curdie's eye. He stooped, picked up a piece of the stone he had just broken, and put it in his pocket. "I suppose you're going to break another of my windows with that stone," said the barber. "Oh, no," said Curdie. "I didn't mean to break your window, and I certainly won't break another." "Give me that stone," said the barber. Curdie gave it to him, and the barber threw it over the city wall. "I thought you wanted the stone," said Curdie. "No, you fool," answered the barber. "What should I want with the stone?" Curdie stooped and picked up another. "Give me that stone," said the barber. "No," answered Curdie, "you have just told me you don't want a stone." "And I do." The barber took Curdie by the collar. "Come now, you pay me for that window." "How much?" asked Curdie. The barber said, "A crown," but the baker, annoyed at the heartlessness of the barber and thinking more of his broken window than the bump on his friend's forehead, interfered. "No, no," he said to Curdie, "don't you pay any such sum. A little pain like that cost only a quarter." "Well, to be certain," said Curdie, "I'll give him a half." Between the two. For he doubted the baker as well as the barber. Perhaps one day, if he finds he has asked too much, he will bring me the difference. "Ha ha," laughed the barber. "A fool and his money are soon parted." But as soon as he took the coin from Curdie's hand, he grasped it in affected reconciliation and real satisfaction. In Curdie's, his was the cold, smooth, leathery palm of a monkey. He looked up, almost expecting to see him pop the monkey in his cheek. But he was not yet got so far as that, though he was well on the road to it. Then he would have no other pocket. "I am glad that stone is gone, anyhow," said the baker. "It was the bane of my life. I had no idea how easy it was to remove it. Give me your pickaxe, young miner, and I will show you how a baker can make the stones fly." He caught the tool out of Curdie's hand and flew at one of the foundation stones of the gateway, but he jarred his arm terribly, scarcely chipped the stone, dropped the mattock with a cry of pain, and ran into his own shop. Curdie picked up his implement. Remember, he's a miner, he knows how to use his tools. And looking after the baker, saw bread in the window and followed him in. But the baker, ashamed of himself and thinking he was come to laugh at him, popped out of the back door, and when Curdie entered, the baker's wife came from the bakehouse to serve him. Curdie requested to know the price of a certain good-sized loaf. Now the baker's wife had been watching what had passed since first her husband ran out of the shop, and she liked the look of Curdie. Also she was more honest than her husband. Casting a glance to the back door, she replied, "That is not the best bread. I will sell you a loaf of what we bake for ourselves." And when she had spoken, she laid a finger to her lips. "Take care of yourself in this place, my son," she added. "They do not love strangers. I was once a stranger here, and I know what I say." Then, fancying she heard her husband, "That is a strange animal," she said in a louder voice. "Yes," answered Curdie, "she's no beauty, but she is very good, and we love each other. Don't we, Lina?" Lina looked up and whined. Curdie threw her the half of his loaf, which she ate while her master and the baker's wife talked a little. Then the baker's wife gave them some water, and Curdie, having paid for his loaf, he and Lina went up the street together. And that's the end of chapter 13, and I shall have a drink of water and see if I can get this to work for the pictures. Now, that one is image, just chattered together. Off you go. That image, right, and we shall find where that image is stored. Splash. And we shall upload a new one when I get my new computer. Well, second-hand. It's an old gaming computer of son of Jev's. When I get that one up and running, once my office behind me is all sorted, because currently it's just storage space, I don't think I'll have this lagging happening. That would be good. That would be very good. I'm going to guess that it's Sunday night over in Turkey. That's where Forez is. And in Canada. And it's really late at night in Turkey at the moment, I think. No, it's the other way around. It's not that late at night in Turkey. It's more late at night in Canada. That would be right, wouldn't it? Oh, I don't know. Just ignore me. Come on, give me the preview so I grab the right one. And I think it is this one. And then I have to resize it so it actually is visible for you. So how's your weekend been? Has the excessive heat started to die down a little bit in the northern hemisphere? I hope so. I've been hearing it's been rather uncomfortable over there, all over the place. And then on top of that, there's been really weird, apart from the temperature, there's been other weird weather things happening. So here we go. Come on, come on. It's getting there. It's taking so long. Hurry up. I'm waiting for it to finish loading the new image into the image handler. Oh, goodness me. It probably would have been better if I'd actually restarted my computer before I decided to go streaming today. But it's just, I've been packing stuff to go on our trip. Now, there's the image, and I shall make it bigger for you so you can see it. Oh, it should be coming. There it is. It's really small. Now let's see if I can make it a little bit bigger for you. I want the resize handle. Come on, give it to me. It's taking so long. This is going to cover up part of the chat window, but hey, it's going to cover up most of the chat window. I'll still be able to chat. That's right, you just won't be able to see all of it straight away. That way you can actually see what some of the creatures look like, I hope. Saving, waiting for... There you go, see? The strange animals. Very strange animals. I don't think it shows the one with the long... Oh, yes, it does. Way in the background on the left there. That way, that way, that way. You can't see it. Up. Between those two trees, the big, thick tree, and then the one to the left of it, there is a something that goes like this. A squiggly line that goes up with a head on top of it. That's the snake-like creature. And let's see if we can get the other image as well. I don't know if it's actually the one that we need. They really are quite intriguing creatures. Someone's had a lot of fun imagining them, I think. Upload, we'll find a new one. I don't know what the other one's going to look like because it shows so small on my preview on my computer. I don't even know if it's the right one, but that's all right. It's from the same story. That's what counts. And come on. Here it comes. Into my image handler. Oh, okay. This one isn't happening yet. It will happen shortly, but I'm going to upload it because it's in the story a little bit further on. I actually need to do a new overlay so that we can actually add pictures as we're reading the story and have them preloaded. So I can do that. That would be quite good, wouldn't it? Would you like me to do that sometime when I have time? Would you like me to sort a different overlay, which means that we can see our chat, we can see me reading you the story if you want to still see me reading you the story, and also we can see the pictures, the illustrations from the story. I think that one might be quite a neat idea, actually. And here, for me, should come the new image that I just added. Here it is. I'm just trying to get the size to fit. There we go, and hit the save button. Oh, you like the overlay? Yeah, I quite like I like the colours in it. I like the fact that it's not too busy, but it's also not too stationary, like it's got the little wee colour trace around the edge. And there you go, there's the other one. Oh, why is it not showing the bottom of the picture? I'll bring that in from the side. That should correct it a little bit. There. Save. I'll put these images up over on Discord too, so you'll be able to see them. With the overlay, I like to be able to have the title of the book we're reading and who the author is. And it's quite nifty having my social media links written up there. But I like to have the chat box so you guys can chat to each other as well. So we'll see how we go. You had an incident with ice and freezers. Do I want to know what happened? Yeah, we'll see. Anyway, I'm going to carry on reading. You can look at the picture. And, oh dear, so much ice. Ice and freezers. Have you been trying to clean the ice out of the freezer? Or was it getting too hot and so you needed some ice from the freezer? All over the floor. Oh dear. Oh, no, not an ice machine. Ice maker. Going weird. Is that what it was? Anyway, I'm going to carry on reading. We'll read this next chapter and then we'll see how we go. So we are reading The Princess and Curdie by George MacDonald, and this is chapter 14, The Dogs of Gwyntystorm. The steep street led them straight up to a large marketplace with butchers' shops, about which were many dogs. The moment they caught sight of Lina, one and all, they came rushing down upon her, giving her no chance of explaining herself. When Curdie saw the dogs coming, he heaved up his mattock over his shoulder and was ready if they would have it so. So he was going to defend her. Sorry, I'm just reading your comments. I've done that. Yeah, you're trying to get the ice out of the ice molds and it goes, it won't come out, and then it all comes out. Yeah, anyway, carry on. So he picked up his mattock, he threw it over his shoulder, and he was ready to use it to go to battle to defend Lina. Seeing him thus prepared to defend his follower, a great ugly bulldog flew at him. With the first blow, Curdie struck him through the brain, and the brute fell dead at his feet. But he could not at once recover his weapon, which stuck in the skull of his foe, and a huge mastiff, seeing him thus hampered, flew at him next. Now Lina, who had shown herself so brave upon the road thither, had grown shy upon entering the city, and kept always at Curdie's heel. But it was her turn now. The moment she saw her master in danger, she seemed to go mad with rage. As the mastiff jumped at Curdie's throat, Lina flew at his, seized him with her tremendous jaws, gave one roaring grind, and he lay beside the bulldog with his neck broken. They were the best dogs in the market. After the judgment of the butchers of Gwyntystorm, down came their masters, knife in hand. Curdie drew himself up fearlessly, mattock on his shoulder. He'd managed to get it out then. And awaited their coming, while at his heel his awful attendant showed not only her outside fringe of icicle teeth, but a double row of right serviceable fangs she wore inside her mouth, and her green eyes flashed yellow as gold. The butchers, not liking the look of either of them, nor of the dogs at their feet, drew back and began to remonstrate in the manner of outraged men. "Stranger," said the first, "that bulldog is mine." "Take him then," said Curdie, indignant. "You've killed him." "Yes, else he would have killed me." "That's no business of mine." "No? No. That makes it the more mine then," said Curdie. "This sort of thing won't do, you know," said the other butcher. "I'm thinking that we're finding that the animals take after their owners in this case, and they have chosen to behave in this manner. Hang on. That sort of thing won't do, you know, said the other butcher. That's true, said Curdie. That's my mastiff, said the butcher. And as he ought to be, said Curdie. Your brute shall be burnt alive for it, said the butcher. Not yet, answered Curdie. We have done no wrong. We were walking quietly up your street when your dogs flew at us. If you don't teach your dogs how to treat strangers, you must take the consequences. They treat them quite properly, said the butcher. What right has anyone to bring an abomination like that into our city? The horror is enough to make an idiot of every child in the place. We are both subjects of the king, and my poor animal can't help her looks. How would you like to be served like that because you are ugly? She's not a bit fonder of her looks than you are. Only what can she do to change them? I'll do to change them, said the fellow. Thereupon the butchers brandished their long knives and advanced, keeping their eyes upon Lina. Don't be afraid, Lina, cried Curdie. I'll kill one, you kill the other. Lina gave a howl that might have terrified an army and crouched, ready to spring. The butchers turned and ran. By this time a great crowd had gathered behind the butchers, and in it a number of boys returning from school, who began to stone the strangers. It was a way they had with man or beast they did not expect to make anything by. One of the stones struck Lina. It caught her in her teeth, and crunched it, that it fell in gravel from her mouth. Some of the foremost of the crowd saw this, and it terrified them. They drew back. The rest took fright from their retreat. The panic spread, and at last the crowd scattered in all directions. They ran and cried out and said the devil and his dam come to Gwyntystorm. So Curdie and Lina were left standing unmolested in the marketplace. But the terror of them spread throughout the city, and everybody began to shut and lock his door, so that by the time the setting sun shone down the street, there was not a shop left open, for fear of the devil and his horrible dam. That's female. But all the upper windows within sight of them were crowded with heads watching them, where they stood lonely in the deserted marketplace. Curdie looked carefully all around, but could not see one open door. He caught sight of the sign of an inn, however, and laying down his mattock, and telling Lina to take care of it, walked up to the door of it and knocked. But the people in the house, instead of opening the door, threw things at him from the windows. They would not listen to a word he said, but sent him back to Lina with blood running down his face. When Lina saw that, she leapt up in a fury and was rushing at the house, into which she would certainly have broken. But Curdie called her and made her lie down beside him, while he bethought him what next he should do. Lina, he said, the people keep their gates open, but their houses and their hearts shut. As if she knew it was her presence that had brought this trouble upon him, she rose and went round and round him, purring like a tigress, and rubbing herself against his legs. Now there was one little thatched house that stood squeezed in between two tall gables, and the sides of the two great houses shot out projecting windows that nearly met across the roof of the little one, so that it lay in the street like a doll's house. In this house lived a poor old woman with a grandchild. And because she never gossiped or quarrelled or chafed in the market, but went without what she could not afford, the people called her a witch, and would have done her many an ill turn if they had not been afraid of her, just because she was different. Now, while Curdie was looking in another direction, the door opened, and out came a little dark-haired, black-eyed, gypsy-looking child, and toddled across the marketplace towards the outcasts. The moment they saw her coming, Lina lay down flat on the road, and with her two huge forepaws covering her mouth, while Curdie went to meet her, holding out his arms. The little one went straight to him, and held up her mouth to be kissed. Then she took him by the hand and drew him towards the house, and Curdie yielded to the silent invitation. But when Lina rose to follow, the child shrunk from her, frightened a little. Curdie took her up, and holding her on one arm, patted Lina with the other hand. Then the child wanted also to pat Doggy, as she called her by a right bountiful stretch of courtesy, and having once patted her, nothing would serve but Curdie must let her have a ride on doggy. So he set her on Lina's back, holding her hand, and she rode home in merry triumph, all unconscious of the hundreds of eyes staring at her foolhardiness from the windows about the marketplace, or the murmur of deep disapproval that rose from as many lips. At the door stood the grandmother to receive them. She caught the child to her bosom with delight at her courage, welcomed Curdie, and showed no dread of Lina. Many with a significant nods exchanged, and many a one said to another that the devil and the witch were old friends. But the woman was only a wise woman, who, having seen how Curdie and Lina behaved to each other, judged from that what sort they were, and so made them welcome in her house. She was not like her fellow townspeople, for that they were strangers recommended them to her. The moment her door was shut, the other doors began to open, and soon there appeared little groups about here and there a threshold, while a few of the more courageous ventured out upon the square, all ready to make for their houses again, however, upon the least sign of movement in the little thatched one. The baker and the barber had joined one of these groups, and they were busily wagging their tongues against Curdie and his horrible beast. "He can't be honest," said the barber, "for he paid me double the worth of the pane he broke in my window." And then he told them how Curdie broke his window by breaking a stone in the street with his hammer. There the baker struck in. "Now that was the stone," said he, "over which I had fallen 3 times within the last month. Could it be by fair means he broke that to pieces at the first blow? Just to make up my mind on that point, I tried his own hammer against a stone in the gate. It nearly broke both my arms, and loosened half the teeth in my head." And that's the end of that chapter. And the next one is not so long either. So it doesn't matter what a stranger does, it's the fact that they are a stranger. They will find some way of misinterpreting them. Oh dear. This doesn't bode well, does it? Initially for Curdie and Lina, but later on I think it does not bode well for the people of the town, the city. Now, I better have my drink of water. Yes, I know. Come on. Let's just find that picture, and we'll go back to... What are we going back to? We are going back to our book cover. Okay? This one shouldn't take quite so long, because I've already got the image in the system. Getting there, and it is that one. And then I resize it. Come on, give me the resize handle, not the move one. There. That's better. And I can move that so it goes back to its proper place. Yes, I'm tapping keys on my keyboard. And yes, it overlaps the chat a little bit, but that's okay. So here we go, and it should be coming any moment now. There you go, back to the cover. Now, The Princess and Curdie by George MacDonald, Chapter 15, Derba and Barbara. Meantime, the wanderers were hospitably entertained by the old woman and her grandchild. And they were all very comfortable and happy together. Little Barbara sat upon Curdie's knee, and he told her stories about the mines and his adventures in them, but he never mentioned the king or the princess, for all that story was hard to believe, and he told her about his mother and his father and how good they were, and Derba sat and listened. At last little Barbara fell asleep in Curdie's arms, and her grandmother carried her to bed. It was a poor little house, and Derba gave up her own room to Curdie because he was honest and talked wisely. Curdie saw how it was and begged her to allow him to lie on the floor, but she would not hear of it. In the night he was waked by Lina pulling at him. As soon as he spoke to her she ceased, and Curdie, listening, thought he heard someone trying to get in. He rose, took his mattock, and went about the house, listening and watching, but although he heard noises now at one place, now at another, he could not think what they meant, for no one appeared. Certainly, considering how she had frightened them all in the day, it was not likely anyone would attack Lina at night. By and by the noises ceased, and Curdie went back to his bed and slept undisturbed. In the morning, however, Derba came to him in great agitation and said they had fastened up the door so that she could not get out. Sorry, I'm trying to turn the page and I hit the wrong bit. Curdie rose immediately and went with her, and they found that not only the door but every window in the house was so secured on the outside that it was impossible to open one of them without using great force. Poor Derba looked anxiously in Curdie's face. He broke out laughing. They are much mistaken, he said, if they fancy they could keep Lina and a miner in any house in Gwyntystorm, even if they built up the doors and windows. With that he shouldered his mattock, but Derba begged him not to make a hole in her house just yet. She had plenty for breakfast, she said, and before it was time for dinner they would know what the people meant by it. And indeed they did, for within an hour appeared one of the chief magistrates of the city, accompanied by a score of soldiers with drawn swords, and followed by a great multitude of the people, requiring the miner and his brute to yield themselves, the one that he might be tried for the disturbance he had occasioned and the injury he had committed, the other that she might be roasted alive for her part in killing two valuable and harmless animals belonging to worthy citizens. The summons was preceded and followed by flourish of trumpet, and was read with every formality by the city marshal himself. The moment he ended, Lina ran into the little passage and stood opposite the door. "I surrender," cried Curdie. "Then tie up your brute and give her here." "No, no," cried Curdie through the door. "I surrender, but I'm not going to do your hangman's work. If you want my dog, you must take her." "Then we shall set the house on fire and burn witch and all." "It will go hard with us, but we shall kill a few dozen of you first," cried Curdie. "We're not the least afraid of you." With that Curdie turned to Derba and said, "Don't be frightened. I have a strong feeling that all will be well. Surely no trouble will come to you for being good to strangers." "But the poor dog," said Derba. Now Curdie and Lina understood each other more than a little by this time, and not only had he seen that she understood the proclamation, but when she looked up at him after it was read, it was with such a grin and such a yellow flash that he saw also she was determined to take care of herself. "The dog will probably give you reason to think a little more of her ere long," he answered. "But now," he went on, "I fear I must hurt your house a little. I have great confidence, however, that I shall be able to make up to you for it one day." "Never mind the house, if only you can get safe off," she answered. "I don't think they will hurt this precious lamb," she added, clasping little Barbara to her bosom. "For myself it is all one. I am ready for anything." "It is but a little hole for Lina that I want to make," said Curdie. "She can creep through a much smaller one than you would think." Again he took his mattock and went to the back wall. "They won't burn the house," he said to himself. "There's too good a one on each side of it." That's a good point, because the neighbouring houses are so close they will catch fire if they set fire to her house. The tumult had kept increasing every moment, and the city marshal had been shouting, but Curdie had not listened to him. When now they heard the blows of his mattock, there went up a great cry, and the people taunted the soldiers that they were afraid of a dog and his miner. The soldiers therefore made a rush at the door and cut its fastenings. The moment they opened it, out leapt Lina, with a roar so unnaturally horrible that the sword arms of the soldiers dropped by their sides, paralysed with the terror of that cry. The crowd fled in every direction, shrieking and yelling with mortal dismay, and without even knocking down with her tail, not to say biting a man of them with her pulverizing jaws, Lina vanished. So she didn't harm anyone. She just frightened them. No one knew whither, for not one of the crowd had had courage to look upon her. The moment she was gone, Curdie advanced and gave himself up. The soldiers were so filled with fear, shame, and chagrin that they were quite ready to kill him on the spot. People who have been embarrassed don't like it. Yeah. But he stood quietly facing them with his mattock on his shoulder, and the magistrate wishing to examine him, and the people to see him made an example of. The soldiers had to content themselves with taking him. Partly for derision, partly to hurt him, they laid his mattock against his back and tied his arms to it. They led him up a very steep street, and up another still, all the crowd following. The king's palace castle rose towering above them, but they stopped before they reached it, at a low-browed door, and a great, dull, heavy-looking building. The city marshal opened it with a key which hung at his girdle, and ordered Curdie to enter. The place within was dark as night, and while he was feeling his way with his feet, the marshal gave him a rough push. He fell and rolled once or twice over, unable to help himself because his hands were tied behind him. It was the hour of the magistrate's second and most important breakfast. See you, Lemon. It was the hour of the magistrate's second and most important breakfast, and until that was over he never found himself capable of attending to a case with concentration sufficient to the distinguishing of the side upon which his own advantage lay. And hence was this respite for Curdie, with the time to collect his thoughts. But indeed he had very few to collect, for all he had to do, so far as he could see, was to wait for what would come next. Neither had he much power to collect them, for he was a great deal shaken. In a few minutes he discovered to his great relief that from the projection of the pick end of his mattock beyond his body, the fall had loosened the ropes tied round it. He got one hand disengaged and then the other, and presently stood free with his good mattock once more in right serviceable relation to his arms and legs. And it's 4:20, and I'm going to stop. And that's a really interesting place to stop the story, because we don't know what's going to happen next, but it might work well for him because he's got his own tools that he knows really well, all free and ready to use. Isn't that cool? So I'm thinking that the people of this town might actually be about to learn some rather important lessons about how they approach life and strangers and what's important. So thank you for listening with us. Thank you for being here, and feel free to share with your friends that you've found something new to listen to if you've not listened to us before, or if you think that you know somebody who might enjoy having a listen to some old-fashioned stories, please give them the link, or something, whatever. Find a way to tell them about it so that they can come and enjoy the stories too. Do join our Discord server, which is in one of the links below the story here. And do also have a look at our YouTube channel, because there are stories that we have done in the past that you can have a listen to while you're waiting for the next day's reading to happen, which I read on Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays at 3 p.m. on New Zealand time. Whether it's daylight savings or normal, doesn't matter. I read at 3 p.m. on our current clock. So you can go and find a website that tells you what time that is in your time zone. There you go. That's your research for the day. So please join us on Discord, join us on YouTube, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.